My earliest memory isn't of a warm hug or a lullaby before bed. It's the sharp scent of polished mahogany and the reverent, hushed tones my parents used when discussing the business. I was maybe 5, perched uncomfortably on a high stool in my father's study. A room built for legacy, not for a child's imagination. Arthur, my older brother, was already showing his gift. Just 7 years old, but those little fingers traced ledger lines like he'd been born to it. Father beamed at him, pride practically radiating from his skin. Me? I was doodling spaceships on the back of a discarded invoice. That was the first time I understood where I stood, an artistic dreamer in a family of pragmatic titans. The Wellingtons weren't just a family, we were an institution. Generations of calculated investments, acquisitions, and boardroom victories had built an empire, from textiles to tech. Our name opened doors. It demanded respect. But to me, it felt like a weight I couldn't put down. Arthur was the golden boy, effortless, charismatic, precise. Every report card, every trophy, every curated introduction at some networking event, another jewel in his crown. And I was the quiet afterthought. Arthur's a Wellington through and through, grandfather would boom, clapping him on the back. Then came the afterthought. And Evelyn, well, she has her interests. My interests, art, literature, imagination, were cute little quirks, phases, things I'd eventually grow out of before stepping into the real world of mergers and market share. My mother, Eleanor, was no less demanding, just different. She orchestrated our social standing like a conductor, every movement, every word, rehearsed. Her love was tied to performance, my posture, my tone, my ability to represent the Wellington name. Smile, Evelyn, shoulders, back. Remember who you are. But to her, who I was never the point. Who I appeared to be, that was everything. I learned early, vulnerability was weakness. Authenticity was risky. I became a quiet shapeshifter. Polite, invisible, convenient. I remember once, I painted a vivid landscape, bright colors, bold brushwork. I was so proud. My father took one glance and smiled kindly. You should focus more on your math homework, sweetheart. That was it. Just enough kindness to dismiss me without a fight. Every family portrait I felt like an ill-fitting puzzle piece. The slight downturn of my lips, the faraway look in my eyes, tiny rebellions that no one noticed. By the time I reached 30, I'd carved out my own space, a modest but meaningful career as a freelance editor. No mansion, no sports car, just a small apartment filled with books, a reliable hatchback, and a quiet sense of purpose. It wasn't Wellington-level success, but it was mine. I often wondered if they even knew what I really did, or if they filed it under Evelyn's little hobby that pays her rent. Every family gathering felt like a performance review, subtle critiques disguised as concern. Are you happy, darling? You look a little tired. Maybe a more stable job would do you good. The message was always clear. This life I'd built? Not enough. Not for a Wellington, and after decades. A slow, creeping weariness settled into my bones, a resignation that this shadow life was simply my lot. Evelyn, the outlier, the one who didn't quite fit. I stopped trying to force it, stopped fighting for a seat I was never truly offered. It was easier to exist on the periphery, to observe rather than be consumed. Still, in the quietest hours of the night, I'd let myself imagine what it would feel like to break free, to cut every polished, perfumed thread that tied me to them. And in those moments, buried deep under all the doubt, was a flicker of something else. A spark, defiance, waiting for the right gust of wind to fan it into flame. For years, the subtle barbs and implied disappointments of my family were background noise, a constant hum I had learned to filter out. But filters wear thin, and the hum had begun to grate. The only place where I ever felt truly seen, unconditionally loved, was with Liam. We met at an art gallery opening I had no interest in attending, one of those pretentious events my mother insisted was good for networking. While she schmoozed with someone's senator cousin, I wandered off and found myself staring at a vibrant abstract painting that stirred something in me. Then a voice beside me said, "That one always makes me want to dance." Just like that, the cold, curated air of the room cracked. Liam, with his warm eyes and quiet confidence, had a way of making things feel simple, even in spaces built to impress. He was a landscape architect. He loved wild spaces, real things. His family was loud and chaotic and beautifully unfiltered. They argued, they hugged, they listened, they laughed. They were everything mine wasn't. Being with Liam felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. He never once asked me to be more than I was. He loved my quiet passion for books, my tendency to get lost in thought, the way my apartment was always slightly messy but full of warmth. He celebrated my small wins and held me in silence when I felt invisible. He was my anchor. While my family jetted to Italy for vineyard tours, Liam and I pitched tents in national parks and counted stars. While they dissected the market over foie gras, we argued about Jane Austen over pancakes. He saw through the act, the mask, the whole Wellington charade. "You don't owe them anything, Ev," he'd say. "Your worth isn't tied to their approval." He never pushed, never tried to force a confrontation. But he was always ready. Steady. In case I ever decided to draw the line. The idea of cutting ties felt impossible. Like cutting off a limb, even if it had turned gangrenous. The Wellingtons weren't just in my life. They were in my blood. Even their silence could wound me. They didn't yell. They didn't rage. They just made you feel small, diminished, disappointing. And so I kept showing up. The family dinners, the galas, the holiday photo shoots, smiling, sitting still, letting their narrative wash over me. But Liam was always there, his hand in mine under the table, a quiet squeeze, a glance that said, "You don't have to pretend." He became my buffer, absorbing the pressure, deflecting their questions with polite firmness. He gave me room to breathe, even in rooms where I felt like I was suffocating. Still, I knew. This fragile peace wouldn't last. The tension wasn't just in me anymore. It was in them. The cracks were showing, and it was only a matter of time before the image shattered completely. The Wellington Annual Charity Gala was its own kind of purgatory. Held every spring at the Grand Hyatt, it wasn't about charity, not really. It was about wealth, power, influence, image. My mother, Eleanor, planned it like a military operation. Every guest, every flower arrangement, every wine pairing, all meticulously controlled. It was her legacy, polished and displayed for the public. Arthur, of course, was always center stage. He practiced his smile the way most people rehearse a speech. He moved through the room like it was built for him. Me. I was usually tucked away at a back table, sipping something flat and warm, nodding politely to people I barely knew. Liam always came with me. His presence made the entire evening survivable. While I was busy being invisible, he'd whisper something snarky about the hors d'oeuvres, or make me laugh with his commentary on someone's power handshake. It kept me sane, for a few hours, at least. But this year, something felt off. The air buzzed with tension. I caught snippets of hushed conversations. market fluctuations, new regulations, unexpected liquidity shifts. My father looked strained, not angry, not even worried, just tense, like a man waiting for the crash he already knows is coming. Arthur wasn't his usual polished self either. His smile flickered too fast. His eyes darted. I didn't think much of it at first. I was too busy trying to keep my dress from itching and find Liam in the crowd. Then it happened. My mother stepped onto the stage, radiant in emerald, bathed in light. She welcomed everyone, spoke of legacy, of family values, of giving back. Then came the acknowledgments. Arthur was praised for his strategic insight, my father for his unwavering support, and then me. My daughter, Evelyn, she said, her voice sweet and sharp, has always been a quiet supporter, offering her editorial eye to our publications. While her talents lie outside the traditional business world, her willingness to assist, however modestly, is appreciated. The room was silent, just for a beat. And then the polite applause, the nods, the awkward half smiles. I felt every cell in my body stiffen, not just from embarrassment, from recognition. That was deliberate. She could have said nothing. That would have been better. But instead, she chose to remind everyone exactly who I was. Or rather, who I wasn't. I wasn't a leader, I wasn't strategic, I wasn't essential, I was a footnote, a well-behaved inconvenience. I saw it in the eyes of my cousins, amusement barely concealed. Poor Evelyn, still trying to matter. The shame hit fast, hot. But before it could consume me, something shifted. A new voice took the mic. My father. He bypassed the script. No jokes, no smiles. He cleared his throat and said, "There's been a change in the family's investment structure. Due to recent volatility, we've made decisive moves to protect key assets." He used words like diversification and agility and emerging opportunities. But the tone was damage control. I scanned the room. The smiles had vanished. What had started as a celebration now smelled like desperation. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. My public erasure wasn't an accident. It was a diversion. They were in trouble. Real trouble. And I was the distraction. The insignificant daughter, offered up for a quick laugh or a pity clap. While the foundation beneath them quietly crumbled. I didn't feel small anymore. I felt angry, ice cold, crystal clear, angry. And for the first time in my life, I stopped hoping they'd see me and started preparing to make them. The drive home from the gala was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, the heavy, choking kind, the kind that fills the car like smoke. Liam gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of rage and shame. Her words, however modestly, editorial eye, they echoed like gunshots inside my head. She didn't just diminish me, she erased me in front of everyone. And then my father, with his sudden financial announcement. A desperate shift disguised as strategy. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the image, the spin, the lies. When we pulled into our driveway, Liam put the car in park but didn't move. "You okay?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No," I whispered. "I'm not. I'm done." He turned toward me. His expression wasn't shocked. It was something gentler, like relief that I'd finally said it out loud. Inside, he wrapped his arms around me and let me fall apart. Years of quiet tolerance collapsed all at once. I sobbed. Loud, messy, shaking sobs that came from a place I didn't know existed. He held me without words. No advice, No questions, just presence. Eventually the tears slowed, my breath steadied, and something inside me hardened. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said, voice raw but certain. "I can't keep showing up and letting them chip away at me. I'm not their disappointment. I'm not their embarrassment. I'm not their distraction." He nodded. "So, what do you want to do?" "I want to cut them off." I said it clearly, cleanly. Not for a month, not for space, for good. The weight of it settled into the room. Not crushing, just final. It wasn't an outburst. It was a reckoning. Every insult, every passive-aggressive remark, every forced smile, every performance. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. The next morning I wrote the email. Short. Director. I told them I was stepping away from family events, from foundation work, from anything involving the Wellington name. I didn't ask for understanding. I didn't offer apologies. I just stated the truth. I was done. I hit send. My hand trembled for a moment, then stilled. A wave of nausea, followed by something else. Relief. Like I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for 30 years. Liam was beside me. Quiet. Solid. Proud. I looked at him and realized I hadn't lost anything. I'd reclaimed everything. The storm would come, but I wasn't afraid anymore. After I pressed send, the world went quiet. Too quiet. Liam and I spent the day walking through the park, avoiding the topic altogether. I wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. I just wanted to breathe. That peace lasted exactly 4 hours. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Arthur. Arthur. "Evelyn, what the hell is this email? Are you out of your mind? Call me now." I stared at the screen, smiled, just a little, then turned off my notifications. No response, no explanation, no apology. The silence from my parents was more ominous. They weren't the impulsive type. They were planning, plotting. When the real backlash came, it hit like a wave. The next morning, my phone lit up nonstop. Call after call. Voicemail after voicemail. First came my mother. Her voice was trembling, not with sadness, but with performance. "Evelyn, darling, I'm truly wounded by your sudden coldness. We've always been a family. What could possibly have prompted such an extreme reaction? Your father and I are deeply concerned. Please call us. We just want to understand." No mention of the gala. No acknowledgement of what she'd said. Just guilt, wrapped in honey. Then, Arthur again. No pretense. This time. "Evelyn, this is absurd. You can't just cut off the family. Do you have any idea how this looks?" How this looks. There it was. "This isn't just about you, Evelyn. It's about the Wellington name. You're being incredibly selfish." That word. Selfish. They used it every time I stepped out of line, every time I prioritized myself. It was their favorite weapon. Then came the extended family, distant aunts I barely knew, uncles I hadn't spoken to in years, all concerned, all confused. "Evelyn, your mother is beside herself. Are you sure you're okay? Is everything all right with you mentally?" Translation. You must be unstable to walk away from us. Liam watched it unfold like a slow-motion car crash. "They're trying to shake you," he said, handing me tea. "Don't respond. Don't explain. You made your choice. You don't owe them clarity." And he was right. But the real storm, the one I was waiting for, came 3 days later. Not a call, not a message. An official email from my father's assistant. Subject: urgent, request for meeting. "Evelyn, your presence is required at Wellington HQ. It concerns the family's future." There was no warmth, No invitation, just a demand. Required. I read it 3 times. They weren't trying to bring me back into the fold. They wanted something. Control. Silence. Compliance. I had touched a nerve. And now they were afraid. I turned to Liam. I think I need to go. He didn't argue. He just said, then go in as the woman who sent that email. Not the girl they used to manage. I nodded. The fear was still there, of course it was. But beneath it, something stronger was building. Resolve. I wasn't walking into a negotiation. I was walking into a reckoning. The Wellington corporate office looked exactly as I remembered. Polished, cold, impressive. A cathedral built not for worship, but for domination. I walked through the glass doors alone. No Liam, no backup. I needed to face this as me. My father sat behind his monolithic desk. Marcus Wellington, the name that opened doors and closed conversations. My mother, Eleanor, waited on a nearby sofa, legs crossed, pearls perfectly in place. Arthur stood by the window, hands behind his back, silent. I stepped in, closed the door. Evelyn, my father said, his voice overly formal. Thank you for coming. You didn't invite me, I replied. You summoned me. Let's not pretend this is anything else. He blinked. My mother jumped in. Darling, please. No need for hostility. We're just trying to understand. Really? I said. You humiliated me in front of a room full of people, and now you want to understand? Her smile faltered. You referred to my career as modest, my contribution as editorial. That wasn't a compliment. That was a message. Arthur shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My father leaned back, his tone hardening. Evelyn, this is bigger than your personal feelings. Your email caused damage. To your image, I said, not to me. He exhaled slowly. The timing is unfortunate. We're facing some difficulties, market instability. We've had to make strategic moves. I raised an eyebrow. Strategic, like using the foundation's funds to cover failed investments? That got their attention. My mother stiffened. Arthur turned, confused. My father's eyes narrowed. Where did you hear that? I was at the gala. I heard things. And I pay attention. My mother interjected quickly. It was temporary, just a shift in liquidity. We always intended to restore it. I stared at her. Do you hear yourself? That's donor money. That's fraud. It's not that simple, my father said, voice low. It is, I countered. You took money from a charity to protect your portfolio. That's not strategy. That's theft. Arthur looked stunned. You used the foundation? He asked, eyes wide. Father, you said we were being aggressive, not criminal. I did what I had to, my father snapped. The downturn was worse than expected. If we didn't act fast, everything would have collapsed. My mother nodded furiously. Everything we've built, generations of work, would have vanished. So you lied, I said, to your donors, to your clients, to us. My father stared at me. Then, quietly, he said, we need you to retract that email, to appear publicly with us, show unity, calm the waters. You want me to stand beside you while you defraud people? You're our daughter. This is your legacy, too. No, I said. It's yours. I didn't build this. I don't owe it anything. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand perfectly. I looked at Arthur. His face was pale. Something was shifting in him, cracks forming where certainty used to be. I won't be part of this, I said. And if you think I'll lie for you, you never really knew me at all. My father's words hung in the air. He didn't plead. He didn't apologize. He demanded that I fall in line, that I protect the family name, that I become a shield for their secrets. I looked at him and felt nothing but clarity. "So you want me to stand by you while you commit fraud?" I asked. "You want me to lie, to smile, to help you bury this?" My mother gasped. "Evelyn, how dare you speak to your father that way? This is family." "Is it?" I said. "Because it feels like business. Cold, calculated, transactional." Arthur finally turned from the window. He looked shaken. "Wait, you really used the foundation funds?" he asked, voice low. "I thought you meant market reallocations. Not that." My father's jaw tensed. "It was a temporary measure, meant to stabilize our position." Arthur stared at him. "You lied. You told me it was high-risk strategy, not misappropriation. That's a completely different thing." My mother stepped in again. "Arthur, please, you're upsetting your father." But Arthur wasn't listening anymore. He took a slow step forward, eyes locked on our father. "All my life you've preached about honor, responsibility, that the Wellington name meant something. And now you're asking us to help cover this up?" "It's not a cover-up," my father said. "It's protection, for all of us." "For who we pretend to be," I added, "not who we actually are." Arthur turned to me. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. Long enough to understand why I was thrown under the bus at the gala, to distract from the real problem. Arthur looked at the floor, then back up. "I didn't know. I swear, Evelyn. I didn't know." I believed him. He looked like a man watching the ground crack beneath his feet. "Everything we've built," he whispered. My father tried to recover. "It's salvageable, but only if we act together. Present a united front." Arthur's voice hardened. "You want us to lie." "I want us to survive," my father shot back. There it was again. Survival, their word for deception. Arthur rubbed his forehead, as if trying to wipe away everything he'd just heard. "I can't be part of this," he muttered. "Not like this." He looked at me, for the first time in our lives, truly looked at me. "You were right," he said, "about all of it." I didn't know what to say. For so long, Arthur had been the embodiment of everything I was not. The heir, the favorite, the perfect son. And now, here he was, faltering, waking up. "You don't have to fight this alone," he said, quietly. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. A crack in their perfect mirror, a shift in the story. Arthur wasn't the enemy. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was just a man trying to understand the wreckage of his legacy. And in that moment, he became my unexpected ally. The drive home was different this time. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't questioning. I was wide awake, more alert than I'd felt in years. Arthur hadn't said much after that moment, neither had I. But something unspoken passed between us, a silent truce. Maybe even the start of something like understanding. When I got home, Liam was waiting on the steps, coffee in one hand, worry in his eyes. "Well?" he asked, rising to meet me. I didn't speak. I just walked to him, wrapped my arms around his chest, and held on. That said more than words. Later, I told him everything, every word, every glance, every crack in the armor. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he asked only one question. "What happens now?" That's when it hit me. I didn't have a plan. I'd spent so long preparing to walk away, to burn the bridge. I never stopped to ask what was on the other side. Freedom wasn't as simple as I thought. It came with a price. The next week was chaos. My parents launched a smear campaign, subtle but sharp. Family friends reached out with concerns. My job offers mysteriously vanished. A few of my projects were suddenly delayed, frozen, silenced. The Wellington reach was vast, and they knew exactly where to apply pressure. I had anticipated anger, but not sabotage, not this precision. Liam stood by me through it all. He set up meetings, talked to lawyers, called in favors. He reminded me again and again that I wasn't crazy, that I was doing the right thing, that I was allowed to choose myself. Still, there were nights I couldn't sleep, nights I stared at the ceiling wondering, did I make a mistake? Had I been naive to think I could step away without consequences? But every time that doubt crept in, I remembered the gala, my mother's words, the applause that felt like a knife, and my father's cold demand, retract the email. No, I hadn't been naive. I had been brave. And now, I had to be brave again. I drafted a statement, one I would release publicly, not to smear them, not for revenge, but to tell the truth. My truth. I sent it to a journalist I trusted, someone who had once written a profile on the Wellington Foundation and knew how to read between the lines. Within 24 hours, the article was live. Wellington daughter speaks out. Behind the legacy. It was honest, measured, devastating, and most importantly, mine. The fallout was immediate. Donors pulled support, partners asked questions, board members resigned, my parents went silent. No more emails, no more calls. The reach they once used to control me, now curled back around them. And through it all, I felt something unfamiliar. Not victory, not relief, peace. I had told the truth. I had survived their storm. And in doing so, I had finally stepped into my own name. Weeks passed. The noise faded. No more headlines. No more frantic texts. No more guilt-laced voicemails pretending to be concern. For the first time in my life, silence wasn't a punishment. It was permission to begin again. I started small, coffee with an old professor who once told me my voice mattered. Lunch with a publisher who'd always believed in my work, not my last name. People reached out, not because of scandal, but because they remembered me, the woman beneath the family shadow. I got offered a fellowship, a space to write, to finally speak freely, and I accepted. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with camera flashes or high society handshakes, but it was mine. One afternoon, I walked through a bookstore and saw a collection of essays on the shelf. A small print, my name on the spine, not Wellington, just Evelyn. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't pose for a photo, I just smiled, quiet, certain, solid. Because I had learned something they never taught me at the galas or in boardrooms. Power doesn't come from applause. It comes from knowing who you are when the lights go out. It comes from surviving the unraveling and still choosing to stand. It comes from becoming. Not what they wanted, not what they expected, but something stronger, softer, truer. I went home that night, laid the book on the table, and poured myself a glass of wine. Liam walked in and picked it up. He smiled. "You did it." "No," I said. "I started." Because that's the thing no one tells you about freedom. It's not the end. It's the beginning. There's a letter I wrote, but never sent. It's still in a drawer, folded neatly, dated, the night after the gala. I wrote it in one sitting, furious, heartbroken, clear. It was addressed to my mother. I didn't write it for closure. I didn't write it to wound her. I wrote it because I needed to see the words in front of me, to finally say the things I had swallowed for years. It started like this. "Dear Mother, You once told me that dignity is earned, not inherited. But you forgot to mention that shame can be passed down. Like pearls. Like silence. At the gala, when you smiled as they laughed, I realized something. You weren't protecting me. You were preserving yourself. You shrank me so you could feel taller. You quieted me so your own voice would echo louder. And I let you. For years, I played my part, smiled when it hurt, apologized for taking up space, dressed like a painting you could hang on your reputation. But I am not a brushstroke on your canvas. I am the artist. I am the whole damn gallery. I remember pausing there, reading it back, feeling the power in those words, not as accusation, but as release. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. Finishing the letter, I wrote, I don't hate you. I see you. And maybe that's worse. Because I know the woman you could have been, the one who didn't trade truth for acceptance, the one who didn't ask her daughter to disappear for the family's comfort. But that's not who you chose to be. And now, I choose myself. That was the last line. I folded it, tucked it into an envelope, but never mailed it. Because some letters aren't meant to be sent. They're meant to be written. So, you can finally move on. It came on a Thursday afternoon, an envelope, cream-colored, embossed, hand-delivered, no return address, just my name, Ms. Evelyn Wellington. I almost laughed. I hadn't used that name in months, and yet there it was, elegant, formal, loaded. I opened it slowly, half expecting poison. Inside was a single card. You are cordially invited to the Wellington Annual Benefactors Gala. I stared at it. Same venue, same date, same spectacle. The very event where everything had fractured was now calling me back. Why? Curiosity? Control? Pity? Or maybe something else. I showed it to Liam. He raised an eyebrow. They really don't give up, do they? No, I said, setting the card down. They don't. The old me would have burned it. Torn it up. Refused to even entertain the thought. But the woman I had become? She paused. Not out of weakness, not out of nostalgia, out of choice. Because sometimes strength isn't walking away. It's deciding how and if you return. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the silence, the letter I never sent, the truth I finally spoke. This wasn't just a gala, it was a mirror. A question, was I still running from who I had been? Or had I finally become someone who could walk into that room, stand tall, and owe no one an explanation? 3 days later, I stood outside the venue. Same chandelier, same velvet ropes, but nothing felt the same. Especially not me. I walked in alone. No announcement, no spotlight, just heels on marble, and the sound of a woman who no longer needed approval. Heads turned, eyes widened, but I didn't shrink. I smiled, nodded, made my way through the crowd like I belonged, because I did. Not to them, to myself. I didn't stay long, just long enough. Long enough to look my mother in the eye and see the flicker of something she'd never shown me before. Not pride, not regret, respect. And maybe, just maybe, a hint of fear. I didn't speak to her. I didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. I left before the speeches began. Walked out the same doors I had once stormed through in anger. But this time, I wasn't escaping. I was choosing. And that night, for the first time in my life, I truly felt free. I found my voice and told my story. If it resonated with you, even just a little, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us we're not alone. Thanks for listening.